a vampire lunged at the man and pinned him down. To prevent the man from fighting back, he grabbed the man's collar and slammed him into the wall. Seeing the man subdued, the little girl on the side screamed. Her scream produced a shockwave that sent the man flying 100 meters away. The origin of all these events stemmed from an investigation by an exploration team. A group of biologists from the United States arrived in Bolivia, where they encountered something inexplicable. Reports came in that a 500-year-old man was found in a cave. If this were true, for them, the entire world would be altered as a result. Under the guidance of expert Matt, an armed force arrived at a cave. Inside, they saw a boy carrying a bucket of blood to feed an old man locked in an iron cage. As soon as the boy opened the cage, Dino from the exploration team attempted to rescue the old man. The boy warned that it was a vampire, but Dino failed to realize the severity of the situation. He continued to approach, while the boy immediately fled the scene. Realizing something was amiss, Matt instructed Dino to leave. As Dino turned around, the next second, the vampire appeared in front of him. Dino had no time to dodge, and his blood was sucked by the opponent. The armed forces opened fire, launching an attack on the vampire, until Matt struck the vampire with a hammer, finally defeating the assailant. Matt approached to stop Dino's bleeding, to prevent him from dying due to blood loss. Later on, Dino was taken to the hospital for emergency treatment. Given what had happened, almost no one believed he would survive, but miraculously, he actually walked out of the emergency room without any issues. Feeling incredibly relaxed, he once again experienced the feeling of youth. However, Matt noticed that the wound on Dino's neck had healed, as if there were no issues. Matt believed this breakthrough could change the world, but not long after, Matt noticed blood in Dino's mouth. One of his teeth fell out of his mouth. At this moment, a pandemic was sweeping across the globe. Experts assessed the transmission rate and predicted that 1 week later, it would start spreading in the United States. Experts believed a vaccine must be developed in a short period of time. However, Matt thought it was impossible in such a short time frame, and that vaccine development would take at least 6 months. The group entered a discussion phase, until someone suggested that Dino could be used to complete the research and development. Dino's condition was, he was rapidly approaching becoming a vampire. The experts couldn't fully comprehend what was happening, but they discovered the antibodies in Dino's body are immune to those level 4 viruses. To further investigate, the experts obtained death row inmates from a prison and injected Dino's mutated blood into them. The positive aspect was that, after the injection, people have immune cells, but the negative aspect was that they were no longer human but vampires. Only one young girl temporarily showed no signs of turning into a vampire. Based on this situation, someone proposed a hypothesis, suggesting that the mutation might be age-related, because young people have more neurons than old people, and a higher number of neurons may mitigate the effects of the mutation on an individual. They still needed a child to carry out specific research in order to ultimately determine the feasibility of this plan. Later on, they identified Jane, an orphan, as their experimental subject. The task of capturing Jane was assigned to Agent Max. Unfortunately, he couldn't deceive Jane, as she claimed to feel unwell. Jane returned to her room and escaped through the window. Max soon discovered that Jane had fled and immediately began to pursue her. Max's subordinates at the amusement park successfully captured Jane, but his whereabouts attracted the attention of a tourist. After Max took Jane away, the tourist chose to report it to the police. Following this, the operation leader contacted Max, assuring Max not to worry, that he could handle the police situation. But Max couldn't help but ask why they had to capture a little girl. The leader came up with a reason to appease him. Meanwhile, at the laboratory, Matt, while chatting with his colleagues, noticed both of them had been dreaming about Dino. Dino wanted them to take him home, while Jean, the leader, after seeing the woman's appearance, had a nightmare. In the dream, the woman pinned him down, and all of a sudden, the woman transformed into a vampire, bit him, causing him to wake up from the dream. Meanwhile, because the leader didn't tell Max why they had to capture Jane, Max developed his own thoughts and changed his perspective on the matter. He decided to protect Jane himself. So, Max took advantage of his teammate going to the restroom and rendered his teammate unconscious. Afterward, Max took Jane with him, escaping the surveillance of the laboratory. Leader Jean soon found out what Max had done, so he released news about Max kidnapping children. Max brought Jane to the police station to surrender, but as soon as they arrived and sat down at the police station, Max saw a group of heavily armed men surrounding the police station. Before Max could use the police chief as a hostage, the other side killed the police chief. Subsequently, both sides engaged in intense confrontation. During this process, Max was shot in the abdomen, but Max and Jane managed to find an opportunity. He grabbed a police car and fled the scene. Meanwhile, at the laboratory, strange things were still happening. While the criminal was being injected with the virus serum, he suddenly realized the doctor in charge of the injection was Dino. Just when Dino was about to suck himself, he suddenly woke up. Only then did he realize that he had just had a nightmare. But at that moment, Dino revealed a sinister smile. There were two scientists. While cleaning the place, one of them suddenly thought of teasing the female vampire. He first kicked his teammate Leo's work card into the female vampire's territory. Leo was angry at his behavior, but could only cautiously reach into the cage. He retrieved his work badge as quickly as possible. The man thought the woman wouldn't react, and decided to take a step forward. Just as he put his head close to the cage, the female vampire at an incredibly fast speed bit him, and swiftly started feeding on him. This situation shocked Leo, and could only watch his colleague die on the spot. Meanwhile, Max, he took Jane to a place to rest, but unexpectedly, the landlord informed Jean has many people. Max knows that no matter what he does, it will be a pointless resistance. After settling Jane inside the house, Max stepped outside, but he still wanted to buy some time for Jane, so he lied to Jean, saying that Jane had already escaped abroad. His lie didn't deceive Jean. Jean was prepared to send him to meet God, but at that moment, Jane walked out, and both of them were taken away by the people from the laboratory. Upon arriving at the laboratory, scientists injected Dino's virus serum into Jane, and the rest was observation and experimentation. Scientists injected Dino's virus serum into Jane. Another Dino in a different location sensed Jane, as if a connection was established between them. Jean's story was not over. After dealing with Max, he had to go to the conference room to handle matters there. The female vampire didn't trouble Leo, but dealt with the one who bullied her. The people in the conference room decided to euthanize the female vampire to prevent such incidents from happening. Leo was responsible for escorting Max. The female vampire was thrown into a separate space. The scientists activated a mechanism, and instantly, a beam of sunlight shone upon the female vampire. The intense light began corroding the vampire's skin. Just as the woman was about to meet her demise, Jean pressed the stop button. It turned out, the moment the woman saw Jean, she began to invade his mind. It was showing some initial effects. At this time Jean still have half of my own consciousness. If he were to lose this half of his consciousness, Jean would completely become the puppet of the other side. On the other hand, Max took control of Leo and injected him with a sedative. Afterward, Max used Leo to gain access to another cell in the laboratory, and here were Dino and other mutants. He waved the flashlight at Dino, startling Max with his fierce face. Then, he met Matt. Matt explained everything to him. These people are death row prisoners brought by Max, and Dino's serum mutated these people. At this moment, Matt also discovered that these vampires were capable of secret communication, with Dino being their central figure. This person had never given up on escaping. Max stated, "Then let's kill this guy." However, these mutants launched their counterattack. The scientists discovered that these mutants had independent consciousness, and they were capable of using telekinesis to control human actions. Some scientists couldn't escape in time, and became victims of these vampires. Others can only look at them. As the situation in the laboratory drew high-level attention in the United States, the Secretary of Defense believed that, although the current research on viral vaccines has failed, they could still attempt to turn these mutants into bioweapons. Under the Secretary's request, the scientists embarked on a new research direction to further experiment. They captured a mutant. After gaining control over him, use an electric drill to drill a hole in a man's brain. They placed 2 electronic devices inside, and then a human put on the controller, issuing commands to the mutant. The mutant then completely obeyed the staff's instructions. After testing the commands again, with no issues, they cheered for their success. But all of this was a trick of the mutants. Later that night, the scientist returned to the laboratory. Just as he was about to activate the controller, to continue controlling the mutants. He suddenly heard the voice of the mutants. The other party said he wanted to play a cat and mouse game with the scientists. Before the scientist could recover from the shock, the mutants' handcuffs automatically released. But what shocked the scientist even more was that he saw another version of himself. Terrified, the scientist quickly ran out of the laboratory. Afterward, the mutants, just like a cat catching a mouse, started pursuing him. The scientist, at his fastest speed, found Matt, but there is still a layer of laboratory glass between them. The scientist pleaded with Matt to find a way to save him. Matt, without fully understanding the situation, the scientist had already been caught by the mutants. Matt could only watch as the cat caught the mouse and devoured its prey. On Max's side, there was a disturbance in the underground cell, making him believe it was unsafe there, so Max wanted to take Jane and leave. But the current mutants could locate Jane through telepathy, so the mutant hid at the corner, where Max and the others continued to move forward. They waited for the opponent to appear. Then he pounced on them. Quickly, Max, being overpowered, lost all resistance, just as Max was about to become the opponent's meal. But at that moment, Jane let out a loud scream. The powerful sound wave instantly sent the mutant flying several tens of meters away. As expected, this is the mutation reaction Jane experienced after being injected with the serum. This ability made her a threat to the mutants. However, Jane was exhausted, almost passed out. Fortunately, the leader Jean led the armed forces to the scene, escorting the two to a new stronghold. Meanwhile, at the base, after inspecting the number of mutants, the scientists discovered that the mutant who attacked Max, mutant number 3, escaped. The base had to quickly capture this individual, or it would result in great harm. However, they had no idea where to start searching. What is curious is that Jane could actually sense the location of mutant number 3. Subsequently, these people got into armored vehicles, taking Jane with them to capture mutant number 3. Dino also sensed that something was wrong, so he used his telepathy to call mutant number 3. Number 3 feels that he should give himself some reward, but Dino punched mutant number 3 and told him that he had messed up something important. In Dino's plan, their escape plan was basically about to succeed, but now, due to mutant number 3's unauthorized actions, it had raised the opponent's alertness. And now, with Jane already accompanied by the troops to capture mutant number 3, Dino gave mutant number 3 an order. Jane want the other party to get out of this situation safely, and get rid of Jane at the same time. Otherwise, they would be forever trapped in this bleak place. To fulfill the task given by Dino, mutant number 3 endured the pain from the light exposure, and rushed outside to capture Jane. On the other side, Max and the others entered the warehouse to eliminate the remaining mutants. Later on, Jean instructed Max to rescue Jane. To evade the pursuit of mutant number 3, Jane ran into a warehouse before she could catch her breath. Suddenly, mutant number 3 emerged from beside the bookshelf. Jane reached out and grabbed Jane. Jane knocked down the bookshelf with a scream. No, 3 was pinned down by the fallen bookshelf. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jane opened the door and ran into another room. This also bought time for Max's arrival, allowing him to buy time. Max confronted mutant number 3 and unleashed a continuous barrage of gunfire until he ended the opponent's life. At the base, Dino sensed the failure of mutant number 3. Matt, who was guarding him, also made up his mind to completely eliminate them. He activated the solar power system here, and intense sunlight instantly shone upon the mutants. Matt intended to take advantage of this to kill all of them, but it's not just the imprisoned mutants who are being tortured. Jane, who was far away, along with other mutants, also felt immense pain. The reason why they are in this situation, because they have vampire genes. Once Dino, the main gene, was destroyed, all the other mutants would become collateral damage. Matt had no choice but to pause for now, using solar power to deal with Dino, and then figure out other solutions. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, after knowing that there were unstable factors in the base, ordered the base commander to keep the information classified, ensuring no one knew about the base's situation. Biochemical experiments would continue. Jane was arrested again. Max was also controlled. However, during this process, he managed to grab the opponent's handgun and successfully fought back. This incident led Max to decide to reunite with his ex-wife and return to the research base to rescue Jane. Jean also knows plan for Max failed. On their way back to the base, they were targeted by a thug. The two of them had no choice but to hope that the other party would let them go. At that moment, Jean reappeared and dealt with the thug. Jean told Max that he wouldn't capture them, but instead assist them in counterattacking the base. Jean changed his stance because, in his view, the previous experiments were somewhat beneficial to society, but the ongoing biochemical experiments were unacceptable to him. Jean wanted to join forces with Max to prevent the experiments from continuing. According to the plan, Jean put Max and the other man in the trunk and drove back to the base himself. Subsequently, Jean and the others captured an official, threatening him to open the gate that held the vampires. Meanwhile, Max went in to rescue Jane. However, at that moment, Jean saw on the surveillance the scientist Leo, holding a mop alone, heading towards the communication center's control room. Jean muttered not good to himself, and quickly ran towards the control room. However, he was still a step too late. As Leo, under Dino's control, Leo used the mop to damage the communication center. All the prison doors were thus opened, and all the vampires were set free. Max and his group encountered the vampires at the perfect moment. They could only fight and retreat, but at this moment, his ex-wife was bitten by a vampire. In order to obtain the virus antibodies and save his ex-wife, Max decided to let Jane and his ex-wife take the elevator away. While he stayed behind to search for the antibodies, he armed himself and equipped his weapons and entered the facility. He maintained contact with Jean through the walkie-talkie. Following Jean's instructions, Max arrived at the laboratory and rescued the doctor. They carried the antibodies and searched for an exit. Just as Max approached the exit, Jean informed Max that the surveillance showed that numerous vampires were heading towards him. The two of them took shelter in a cell and sought assistance. Jean and the others were still considering how to rescue Max, but they didn't notice Jane on the side has already come to the computer and activated the self-destruct sequence in the base. Now, the time left for Max was only 2 minutes. Dino possessed human consciousness, and he instantly realized that something was wrong, so he quickly ordered the vampires to scatter and escape. Max understood at this moment the vampires no longer cared about them, so he and the doctor hurried to escape together. Soon, Max broke open a ventilation shaft, and they were able to escape through it. However, at that moment, the doctor made the decision to live and die with the base. She gave the antibodies to Max and decided not to flee, intending to meet the same fate as the vampires. The explosion quickly engulfed the entire base, but Max managed to escape at the last moment. Afterward, he carried the antibodies to the headquarters where the others were located. Max's ex-wife was also able to recover, and everyone felt extremely relieved. However, Jean felt that things were far from simple. If the vampire leader Dino died in the explosion, so Jane would be affected as well. Currently, Jane is fine, which indicates that Dino survived the explosion. He is prepared to find Jane and get some clarity, but she informs him that the vampires are doing well. It's downstairs now. Matt also looks out of the window and sees Dino downstairs. Jean mobilizes the armed forces to launch an offensive against the vampires. Jane and the others safely evacuate, while Jean, in the end, meets his demise in the war against the vampires. Max decides to take Jane out of the United States, but not long after, the vampires catch up to them. Max, alone, goes out armed to confront the vampires, but when Max returns, he has already been bitten by a vampire. Max is infected by the vampire. The others take out their shotguns, preparing to send Max to meet God. However, at that moment, Jane undergoes a sudden mutation and bites everyone to death. Jane injects Max with the only vaccine available. After leaving her final words to him, she goes out alone to confront the vampires. Apocalypse Journey Season 1 concludes here. Although it is a new work in recent years, its content is a fairly cliché American TV series. Its plot design still revolves around humanity's pursuit of a new type of power, the story that ultimately destroyed humanity itself. But compared to many TV dramas that focus on scientific research and viruses, this series expresses its core ideas, centered around humanistic concerns. This is particularly evident in the story. There is a specific plot segment in the story, when the scientists finally make up their minds to deal with the vampire leader, to eliminate future threats, but due to the collateral damage caused by the girl's genes, they give up on dealing with the vampire leader. This plot segment reflects their humanistic concerns, in order to criticize those upper-class people, who are absolutely rational and even cold-blooded, who prioritize researching biochemical weapons, leading to further deterioration of the situation. The humanistic heroes, it is acceptable to a certain extent, they would rather be hurt themselves, sacrifice oneself, I don't want to harm other people's lives either. This spirit and expression may be more moving, but might not necessarily convince the audience logically. However, the series has made some new ideas in some settings. The vampire leader and other vampires are interconnected to some extent, as long as the leader remains alive. As a collective, they will not face failure. Once the leader is eliminated, awaiting everyone is the end of their destiny. If you like my channel, please subscribe to me.